Hello, I'm Alex Hannenberg. We're in Chicago, Illinois on March 3rd, 2017, and I'm with my dear friend, Dr. Mark Warner, to discuss his career in anesthesiology as part of the Wood Library Pender Living History series. Dr. Warner has been president of the American Society of Anesthesiologists, the American Board, and has recently assumed the presidency of the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation. So I think he's going to have a lot to tell us. But before we go much further, I just want to observe that in the specialty of anesthesiology, every time you turn around, there's a Warner. And I'm wondering whether there is a genetic sequence that got a halogenated hydrocarbon in it or something. What's the explanation for Warners being everywhere?
I think it was one of the genes had a methylation problem that caused a defect. But we're very fortunate as a family to have a number of people in the specialty of anesthesiology. I actually come from a dairy farm in Ohio, but I had an aunt and uncle that did pediatric anesthesiology in Children's Hospital in Columbus. And they were pretty inspiring my whole life. And because of them, Mary Ellen and I got interested in the specialty, and then were able to actually get my cousin, who is the son of my aunt and uncle, to come up to Mayo to join us. And then fortunately, the kids wanted to be like their mom, not their dad. And so 2 of our 4 sons are anesthesiologists, and their wives are anesthesiologists. So there's 7 Warners in the Mayo Department of Anesthesiology right now. And I just had a niece graduate, and she's doing pediatric anesthesia training down at Emory. So we're very fortunate to have that. And I will point out, my cousin, David Warner, there are 2 David Warners. So it was very interesting. Their careers kind of paralleled each other. Both were very strong researchers in anesthesia. And David O. Warner is my cousin and was more involved in the pulmonary side of research and now clinical trials. David S. Warner, who's now at Duke after several other places, came up through the neuroanesthesia side. So they even have exchanged emails a number of times when the emails went to the wrong people. So anyhow, so the Warners are very blessed to have had the opportunity to participate in this specialty.
Right, so my sympathy goes out to the page operators at the Mayo Clinic, who must have a lot of confusion there as well. So you had some family role models, maybe not completely genetically determined, but was there something that you saw about anesthesiology as a student, perhaps, that drew you to the specialty?
Oh, exactly. So I was a certified athletic trainer. Coming out of college. I think at the time the youngest one in the country. And it was offered a couple really nice jobs. For example, be the head athletic trainer for the Detroit Lions. But decided maybe I'd be better off going to medical school. And in medical school, I, of course, with the athletic training background, wanted to be an orthopedist initially. So I started going to the operating room, skipping class, to go over and just see what the orthopedic guys did. And I loved it, but to observe them, I'd be staying up with the anesthesia folks. And there were 2 really terrific people at the Medical College of Ohio at the time who really became mentors for me and kind of influenced me into going into the specialty. I knew something about it because of my aunt and uncle. But Lucian Morris, who invented the copper kettle, was at Toledo, Ohio at the time. And then Tom Martin, John T. Martin, or Tom Martin, was there. And they were wonderful people, and they kind of adopted me. And then I started having Mary Ellen go over also. She didn't like to skip class. She was a little bit more of a student and better student than I was, but I had a negative influence on her, but took her anyhow. So they adopted us, and we learned more anesthesia from them just by standing, talking to them, and thought it was terrific. And then Tom Martin, who had been a division chair in the Department of Anesthesia at Mayo before going off to Ochsner Clinic and then to Medical College of Ohio, is the one that said, hey, there's an ASA preceptorship available, and while we'd love to keep you in Toledo, I'd like you to go to Mayo Clinic. And that's how we first got to Mayo Clinic, met Alan Sussler, and became influenced to pursue the specialty.
And so you have stayed at Mayo Clinic your entire career then?
We have. We actually love Mayo Clinic. Mayo's a unique place. It's some people describe it as the Disneyland of medicine. I don't know if that's true or not. Certainly in January in Minnesota, it doesn't feel like Disneyland. Matter of fact, we love Minnesota, but I'll have to say January and the cold isn't very great from my perspective. But on the other hand, it forces you to stay inside and get work done, and that's okay too. So we love Mayo Clinic. We love the environment we're in, because when we went up as preceptors and then eventually as residents, it was a fascinating place. It was a miraculous time for us. We had people like Jack Mitchenfelder, Kai Rader, Alan Sessler, Jerry Gronert, Roy Kuchera, and others. Just really outstanding individuals, leaders in the specialty, and it worked out great for us. We loved it so much, and we love Mayo. Mayo's a little different in that it's got a motto, and that's the needs of the patient come first. And we've seen them live that out my entire 38 years up there. And we love that concept, and we also love the concept that we were salaried. So when anybody at Mayo does something to a patient, it's because you think they need it, because you don't generate additional income for you personally. We thought that was really important, particularly in the surgical world. And we've just loved that practice, big multidisciplinary, large group practice. And we've stayed, it's been wonderful for us, and now it's wonderful for our children.
So it's interesting to hear you cite the salaried position as such a strong positive. There's a great deal of fear of salaried positions in broad swaths of the specialty. What would you say to them?
Well, you know, that's interesting you say that, Alex, because as ASA president, that was probably the biggest fear people had about me. Well, other than the fact maybe I would be incompetent in a variety of things. But I came from a different world that most of them lived and played and worked in. How do you lead an organization of individuals who, the majority of whom, work in a setting where they're paid for the amount of labor they do, and if things go the way that they should for the value that they produce, how does somebody like me represent them? And that's a real concern. And fortunately, during my entire time in leadership roles within ASA, I was teamed up with people that understood the others, the most important of those being you. And I can't tell you what a difference that made. I'm sure I'd have never been elected ASA president had it not been for you right beside me, because people would have been so fearful. In fact, I knew nothing about the private practice side of the world. So it was a blessing and a curse in that respect, but as long as I had you beside me, and others obviously, it worked out just fine. But it's a wonderful way to go through your career, not worried about payment and all.
Right, and I guess I'd add that the world you have lived in your whole career is the world into which all of medicine seems to be evolving. So you not only have had an incredibly productive research career and clinical practice at Mayo, but have been a pretty prominent leader in the clinic administration overall. What did you get out of that?
Well, I tell you, the opportunity to lead is, to me, a very important one. Because if it's one thing for us as individual physicians to have an impact on a single patient or to influence the care of that patient. But to have a satisfying professional career, to me, it doesn't matter if it be in private practice or in academic practice, it's to have a greater sphere of influence. So you influence and have a positive impact on more and more patients. To do that as an individual, you almost have to do it through leadership. So you have a greater sphere of influence and improve the care of more and more patients, because there's only so much a single individual can do one-on-one care. So I've always thought that was the thing you wanted to do. That was probably browbeat into me. Everything from my mom all the way through Dr. Alan Sessler, who was my chair when I first went to Mayo Clinic and has been a mentor, a father figure, to me throughout my entire career.
And to many others.
And to many others also. So I was very fortunate at Mayo. Mayo's so big that in fact you can change leadership roles about every 5 to 6, 7 years and do new things. And I think that's inspiring because when you switch to something new, you bring new perspectives, new goals, objectives, you get them up and going, you start to see them come to fruition, and then you can take what you've learned and go to the next role. So that's kind of how I did it. I went from leading really the pediatrics at Mayo Clinic. Oddly enough, I wasn't trained as a pediatrician, but adapted to that, to running Mayo's hospitals, to running our department, to being on our board of governors and running our administrative committee for the board, which kind of runs the operations of Mayo Clinic, to being dean of graduate medical education, to being dean of the Mayo College of Medicine. So I've had all kind of opportunities within Mayo to grow, and it's been an incredible experience for me to learn from others and hopefully pass along a little bit of that knowledge on to others.
Right, so there's something in the air at Mayo that's very peculiar. It has produced...
Yeah, we have a hog farm just down the road a little ways.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's what's in the air. So is the aroma from the hog farm the factor that has produced so many ASA presidents out of that department?
Well, you know, it is interesting that despite the fact that men and women coming out of Mayo in our specialty don't fully understand private practice. And I expect some academic departments in the country would say we don't fully understand academics either. We're kind of a blend there. We have produced quite a few ASA presidents over the years, right? From the very start with John Lundy and others, all the way until actually in the last 16 years, 4 of the 16 ASA presidents have come from Mayo, 3 from Rochester, and then Dan Cole recently, who is our chair of anesthesiology in Arizona. But so Ron McKenzie in 2000 and J.P. Obenstein in 2015. And what's curious is just until a month ago, the 3 of us would often work together. We'd work in an area that had 2 or 3 individuals, and we'd be the 2 or 3 doing it. So on any given day, you could have all of us working in an ambulatory setting together, and the 4th person that would be there would be my wife, Mary Ellen, who was president of the Wood Library Museum. So a pretty involved group of anesthesiologists.
ASA is grateful.
Oh, well, thank you. And we're very grateful to ASA because it's really been an incredible opportunity. And it's kind of inherent when you go to Mayo. From the very first day, you're told you need to participate professionally in your professional organizations. And that is pervasive. Not everyone does it, but it sparks interest in some people, and we just continue forward.
Right, which is a great way of moving to the question of your personal involvement. Obviously, we've heard about your involvement in the leadership of Mayo Clinic, but the roles that you've played in ASA have been similarly varied and important. What got you interested in ASA? It sounds as though you had your plate pretty full at Mayo.
Well, you know, it's interesting. It goes back actually to my first year. Finished my first year of training, and I won an award for a little clinical study at the Midwest Anesthesia Residents Conference. And I thought that was a pretty big deal, and I evidently did, so did Ron McKenzie, who was ASA president in 2000. And Ron at the time was running the meetings of the Minnesota Society of Anesthesiologists and said as the award winner, I needed to come talk. And not that that talk was particularly good or would be particularly useful to anybody in practice, but I enjoyed meeting everyone. And within a year or 2, I was organizing the meetings. And so Ron McKenzie, and with support of Alan Sessler, really kind of pushed me down that line. And there was a gentleman there also named Dr. Dick Engwall, who just passed away last week. Dick, I remember at the end of one of the meetings, I think it was 1984, sat me down, and I think we were probably each having a beer, and on the back of a napkin drew out what it would take to be ASA president and why I should do it over a 25-year period.
So you had a plan.
It took 26 years, but I followed that plan. I'm not sure I did it consciously, but subconsciously, and kind of did that over almost the exact same time period. So I got very interested, and also as MSA program director, I would invite outstanding specialty leaders, and I got to meet the most incredible people, and it was your textbook come to life. And Betty Stevenson and Skip Ellison and Bruce Collin and Bill Owens, and I could go on and just name the high quality people, not just in academics, but in ASA leadership roles. And the respect I gained for the specialty and for the organization, just from talking to them. And I'd drive them from Rochester, Minnesota up to Minneapolis where the meeting would be. So an hour and a half, they were stuck in the car with me. Yeah. And I got to learn from them, and it was just fascinating. I wanted to emulate them. Matter of fact, I wanted to be like them, but they're not the only ones. My very first day in anesthesiology as a resident in Rochester, Minnesota, June 25th, 1979, my wife and I were in a small room, and it was our department library. It was Friday. We started our internship the next morning. There were only 6 of us. And in walks Alan Sessler. And he talked to us, inspired us in his own quiet way. And on the way home that night, I told Mary Ellen, someday I'd like to be like that. And Alan Sessler at the time, I think he was vice president of the ASA at the time, vice president of scientific affairs. And I'll be darned, if you put our CVs side by side, they're almost identical because he has been my mentor, but so did these others, and it really inspired me to get involved in ASA.
So if you think generically about what your relationship with Ron McKenzie, Alan Sessler, they gave the right person the space and opportunity.
Well, I'm not sure I was the right person, but they certainly opened doors that I would have never, ever imagined. I mean, again, I was a farm kid from Ohio. Who'd have ever thought that I would have these opportunities? But they did open opportunities, and I became an ASA delegate at a very young age, and became a committee member. It was Committee on Residents and Medical Students, actually, in 1987, which is about the same time you were starting on the Committee of Economics. And through that, you came up the professional side of the organization. I came up the scientific side. And there are 5 sections under the Division of Scientific Affairs, for example. I don't know, I think this is correct. I'm probably the only individual that's chaired all 5 of those sections. And oddly enough, as a past president, I still end up chairing one of those sections. So it's for me, been a remarkable opportunity to rise and the breadth of what you learn. And again, hopefully influence in a positive way.
Right, that's a great question. So you're far from done influencing ASA and the specialty.
Much to their chagrin.
But sitting here today, what would you say your most important impact on ASA or the specialty has been so far?
Well, probably the one that I'm most proud thus far to have helped attain is the whole concept of the perioperative surgical home. And I don't know if it's the name itself, but the concept that anesthesiologists, now and in the future, to have a greater sphere of influence on the care of patients, have to expand on out to the full perioperative setting. Because we know so much about perioperative care. No one else has that knowledge, because no one else understands the black box of an operating room and what it requires to get a patient safely through that period. We can provide so much influence in a very positive manner, both in the preoperative and the postoperative periods, that to me that is so important for our specialty to really be important in the future, is to expand out. And you can call it perioperative surgical home, but the concept is getting out of the operating rooms, not that that's the only, that you should leave it, but that you really have to think of the whole perioperative period, because so much of what we do intraoperatively is influenced preoperatively and postoperatively. So that's probably my biggest accomplishment. Now, there were two other things that happened. One was just structurally, and there was some angst and anxiety as we went through taking an organization that had two executive vice presidents and moving that into a single CEO. That was probably the hardest thing to do politically, but it was the right thing to do for the organization. So I'm proud we did that, although at the time it wasn't simple. And then I guess the other thing is the support of our foundations. And while there might be people that wonder why we support our foundations the way we do, and we're one of the few professional organizations in this country that have multiple foundations for multiple purposes, but they're so crucial to the growth of our specialty, both in the growth of knowledge, dissemination of knowledge, to the humanity that charitable foundation brings, that makes us professionals. And so I've felt very strongly about that. I've had the opportunity to be on the executive committee of 3 of our 5 foundations, now president of the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation. Mary Ellen feels the same way. Mary Ellen was president of the Wood Library and Museum. And I guess the only one we've not really had an opportunity, but we like to support, is the ASA Charitable Foundation that you are the president of, Alex.
Going back for a second to perioperative surgical home, the idea of an anesthesiologist with a broad range of influence over the continuum of care is something I've heard about in Rovenstein lectures, for example, going back a couple of decades. So what's taken so long and what's different about this moment?
Well, that's a great question. And I was inspired to hear some of the early Rovenstein speakers, I've heard every one of them since 1985, speak to that issue. I remember Larry Seidman talking about PM, pain medicine, practice management, and perioperative medicine, and others. And to watch that not progress, the idea being out there but people not really receiving it, led to, in 2000, a remarkable thing happened. I think the year was, was it 2000? It was 2000. Jane Majasko, Bruce Collins, Patricia Kapur, Fred Guidry, Jim Cottrell, and others met in San Francisco. So these would be members of the American Board of Anesthesiology, the ASA, and the Residency Review Committee. Got together and had a meeting. I still remember the room 114 in the Marriott Hotel in San Francisco, and had a discussion about how do you move the specialty to do that. And the decision was you do it by changing first the requirements it takes to become board certified in anesthesiology. What do we expect of somebody who's board certified in anesthesiology? Secondly, then, subsequent to that, the program requirements for trainees has to change to expand their experiences beyond the operating room. So more critical care, more preoperative medicine, a different internship. So that's number 2. So once the ABA changed the requirements, the program requirements for training programs had changed. And then 3, eventually, practices and payment models would have to change, which led to the perioperative surgical home. So it was actually a deliberate process in about 2000 by some remarkably enlightened leaders for our specialty that really carried this through. I would be remiss to not point out that Dr. Arnold Berry played a huge role in that, because Arnold kind of bridged all 3 groups in different ways. And
this is Arnold Berry, who served as Vice President for Scientific Affairs.
Who served as Vice President of Scientific Affairs at a later time, but at the time, he was an oral examiner for the ABA, highly respected. He was coming up in different organizational levels within ASA. So he was a key cog, as well as all these other inspirational people, to really start moving the concept of getting anesthesiologists to be more broad in their impact on patient care.
So I'm surprised that your initial answer wasn't the answer is money.
Well, a very wise, great colleague and close friend of mine has this great line that says, the answer is money. Now, what was the question? I believe that's you, Alex.
Well, I mean, at your point, the payment models, I think, are
Had to
going to
follow.
reinforcing the drive in this direction
And it won't
as well.
happen
As well
without
as well
payment
taken.
model changes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have are in a very small and elite club of people who have been president of the ASA and also of the American Board of Anesthesiology. Participating as a director of the ABA is an enormous commitment of time away from home and away from practice. Was it worth it?
Oh, it was worth every minute. I would never change the opportunities I've had in my career. Would I do a couple things differently? Probably, but I would never change the opportunities. The ABA has probably been the area in which I've had the most impact or ability to work closely with colleagues, because the ABA is composed of 12 directors and they're appointed for 12-year terms. So every single one of them becomes a president of the ABA during their time period. But more importantly, there's a way they've organized it, which they call surge elections. So 6 new members come on in a 3-year period, and they're together for the next 9 years, working together to take their ideas that they all bring and their enthusiasm and to implement those ideas. And just as they get toward the end, the next surge comes in. So you're constantly getting an introduction of new ideas, but also enough sustainability that the people there can operationalize them. So it's a very effective organization, because it has an influence on not only what does it take to be board certified, but more importantly, they have an impact on what's it take to be trained in anesthesia. And ultimately, those things get put into practice. So their examination questions drive knowledge and research related to the questions. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Sometimes research drives the question, but sometimes the questions drive the research. So it's a great opportunity to, when you're president of the ABA, to have come through with these colleagues. And so for my surge group, I had Steve Hall, I had Patricia Kapur, David Chestnut, Frid Guidry, and Ken Tuman. And, you know, many very involved in ASA as well as the ABA. So you really have a chance to have a broad impact and a sphere of influence. And to me, it's just been a remarkable opportunity. And then to take that and expand it over to the practice side, at least introducing the concept of perioperative surgical home. But like you say, that has to mature because payment models have to follow it, because ultimately you're not going to get there unless payment models follow it.
So the ABA and the ASA are, strictly speaking, completely separate organizations. As you pointed out, there are people like yourself who overlap, and there are intentional collaborations by design. What's your take on the quality or the strengths and weaknesses of the relationship between the two, between ABA and ASA?
Well, it's interesting in that it's a mutual love-hate relationship in some ways. And I mean that with respect. Each group has to question the other, because it's good to be questioned. I know a lot of leaders don't like to be questioned, but the fact is, it's good to have concepts. If you're moving down a certain line of thinking, to have others constructively criticize them. And I think that's the ABA and the ASA complement each other well in that regard, and they do it respectfully. The ABA has some ideals and it'll go down one direction, and the ASA says, wait a minute, our members say that's not either helpful or that's detrimental. By the same token, the ASA will sometimes go down one direction, and the ABA says, hey, wait a minute, what happened to professionalism related to this, this, and this? And the ABA, being small, has a lot more ability to flex quickly, be nimble in making changes, whereas the ASA can do some things remarkably quickly if needed, but it takes a huge impetus to make that happen. It's more of a ponderous, bureaucratic organization. And as you know, Alex, you've got to convince roughly 300 members of the House of Delegates and some directors that your idea is a good one. And that's hard to get consensus that would drive quick changes. But they complement each other very well. And when I say love-hate relationship, there are periods on different ideas where that waxes and wanes, but ultimately it makes both groups stronger as we move the whole specialty forward.
Now, to move on to the latest and most recent presidency, the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation, founded in 1985, G. Pierce and Jeff Cooper and others, and really looked at across medicine around the world as a true pioneer, and the transformation of the safety of anesthesia practice in the 80s remains breathtaking. Are we done? Do you feel as though the specialty is resting on its laurels, coasting on the accomplishments of the 80s? What's in our future in patient safety?
Well, there's certainly periods where it may feel that way. You and I were fortunate to grow up, as you've noted in the past, in one of the most exciting periods you can even imagine in medicine, where in a very short period of time, technology and other transitions occurred that allowed our specialty to make huge leaps forward in patient safety. That's what drove my interest in our specialty more than any. To read about G. Pierce, Jeff Cooper, them meeting with a group of individuals in Europe who together said we should improve patient safety, and then Jeep and Jeff coming back to ASA and Jeep having the authoritative position to be able to say this needs to happen, and establishing that foundation, the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation. It was a remarkable time, and it inspired me in every way possible. And so most of my academic career has been on the patient safety side. And to have the opportunity to lead this organization, the foundation at this point in time, is terrific. We are not at a standstill. Patient safety improvements will probably be incremental, though, not a gigantic jump. There'll be incremental changes as we improve patient safety. And we have a lot of opportunities, not only in the US, but outside the US. We have one of the most widely circulated anesthesia newsletters in the world. 122,000 people get a hard copy print of the APSF newsletter. We've gone to all the effort of producing that. Why don't we disseminate it worldwide? So we've just started an initiative. It'll be published in 7 different languages. It'll be published on our website in 7 different languages. All of our material will be published in 7 different languages, because there are studies that suggest if you do these particular 7 languages, that you will reach about 95% of all the healthcare providers in the world, that they'll be able to read and understand. So that's just a big initiative for us to have a more global impact, while at the same time doing the incremental changes it's going to take to improve anesthesia patient safety and perioperative safety in this country.
What are the key clinical problems resulting in preventable harm from anesthesia on the agenda today?
Well, there are a number of them, but I'll just start with some that I consider the highest priority. We still have documented well over 1,000 deaths a year in the United States from postoperative opioid-induced respiratory depression. So someone gets a narcotic postoperatively. They may have risk factors that you can identify, they may not, but they develop respiratory depression that's unrecognized and not treated, and they have brain injury or they die. To me, that's one of the, by far, more important of the issues out there. But it's a perioperative issue. It's just not an intraoperative issue. It's the entire perioperative period of care, from recognizing the risk factors that may contribute to somebody being at risk for that, all the way through the processes that are put in place to deliver the drugs, and matter of fact, to change the drugs, to find new medications that don't have respiratory depression. So it opens the whole world of research, not just in the process, but new drugs and new technologies. So that's one. There can be things as simple as airway fires, fires in the operating room, that really are 100% avoidable. And unfortunately, they still occur, and still occur far too frequently. Matter of fact, there almost should never be an airway fire in an operating room, except in an extraordinary circumstance. And why we can't disseminate enough communication to make that not happen is a little beyond me. APSF and ASA and the specialty have had some remarkable successes. So you think back in 1995 to 1999, there was an increasing number of people that developed blindness after spine surgery. No one had the faintest idea why. You couldn't even really hypothesize why. It was rare enough, it was extraordinarily difficult to study, but APSF funded a number of studies that have led to a recognition of risk factors, and because of the ties with the ASA, has been had the ability to develop a practice advisory, working with the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, American Association of Neurological Surgeons, to come up with new ways to approach patients having spine surgery and new ways to treat them intraoperatively and postoperatively. So in fact, there's been a 60% reduction in the last 10 years. So that's a huge success for our specialty, collaborating with other specialties in the perioperative period. And you can go down the line of the remarkable changes out there, but there are still many, many challenges. People having a spontaneous hemorrhage in the brain or elsewhere related to anticoagulation in the perioperative period. And you can just take topic after topic.
Plenty of work to be done. You'll stay busy. Now, we've mentioned a number of times along the way your lovely bride, Mary Ellen, who is herself quite an overachiever. As you said, president of the Wood Library in the past, and also a prolific contributor to the scientific literature in the specialty. I have this vision of a tractor trailer backing up to the Warner household to take away the manuscript submissions. What's it like being under the same roof with two of the most productive academics in the field?
Well, I tell you, I have been incredibly blessed since July 6, 1976, when I saw what I thought was one of the most beautiful blonde-haired women in a beautiful outfit coming out of a building, our first day of medical school. And I thought, I have to get to know that young woman. And I did everything. I did not like to run, but she was in a noontime running group. So I started to run, just so I could be beside her and talk to her of her running. I wiggled my way until we actually shared a cadaver in an anatomy lab, because you spend a lot of time together. And I did about anything to get to know that young woman, and I'll be darned, somehow
it all
worked.
appeared to be accidental.
It all was accidental, of course, plotted from day one. And so I've been so fortunate to have her as a partner as we've gone through this, both personally and professionally. When you mention a van or a truck backing up to haul things out of our house, well, I'm sure our kids will do that immediately if we've not been successful in clearing our house out, because you do accumulate a lot over the years, and a lot of it's related to our specialty and projects we've done. So I've been so fortunate to have her around, and really she's been an ASA delegate since 1991 up until about 2012. Got involved in the foundations, and I couldn't be more proud of her. Hopefully my kids someday will maybe want to emulate their mom.
Oh, or their dad. The specialty and all of our patients would be well served if that turned out to be the case. Mark, thank you.
Thank you very much.